Hello, and welcome back to the New Forest and this look back at 2022 to see some of the things that went on in the forest and the seasonal changes. We'll start at the beginning with a look at January and February. We had a very mild start to January with sunshine and some optimistic male birds singing, hoping to find an early mate. Some of you may have seen one of my videos walking past these beach huts on Avon Beach. On the 3rd of January, 12 of these beach huts were made available to hire for the year, and another 28 were made available for weekly hire. At 8 o'clock in the morning on the 3rd, about 50 people were waiting to hire one of these beach huts. Some of these people had queued for over 24 hours. The lucky ones, who secured a beach hut, paid £2,820 for the summer season, starting in April, or £3,870 for the whole year. Mind you, that's a bargain. Just along the coast is Mudderford Spit. If you want to buy a beach hut there, it'll cost you £300,000 or more. At the end of the first week of January, we had a hard frost. The birds realised that winter wasn't over yet and stopped singing. At this time of year, there isn't a lot of food for the ponies. These two were eating the grass growing in a marshy area, risking getting stuck in the mud. The ponies often eat holly leaves. I'm surprised that they're able to chew the prickly leaves, but they seem to manage. Holly grows throughout the forest, and in many places it cuts out the light to the forest floor. Every winter the forestry cuts the holly back in different places to ensure the maintenance of local plant and wildlife habitats. The greenery is left for the ponies and deer to eat, and what's left rots down. We had heavy rain during the second week of January, and then the sun came out. We had some bright sunny days. We had some cold days. And we had some very cold mornings. On the sunny days, the frost soon melted. The thatched roof of the pub almost looked as if it was on fire. Overall, January was a mild month and turned out to be the sunniest January since records began. By the end of the month, the ground was quite dry. Too dry for the time of year. We need the rain in the winter, not in the summer. Fallow deer retain their antlers from last year and shed them in the spring. Roe deer, though, grow their new antlers in the winter. Here's a buck with his new antlers still covered in velvet as they grow. I don't think he likes the look of me. In each of these diaries this year, we're going to look at a particular bird that you can look out for at this time of year. This is a redwing, which is a member of the thrush family. Large flocks of redwings spend the winter in Britain, and they're quite common in the New Forest. Look out for them in fields, in parks and along the hedges. From a distance they look like song thrushes, but as you get closer you can see that they have distinctive patches of red feathers under their wings. In the spring, the redwings fly back to Scandinavia to breed, before returning here again in the autumn. It's February the 2nd today. That's Candlemas Day. Or if you're in America, it's Groundhog Day. Candlemas Day is an old pagan festival, halfway between the start of winter, on December the 21st, and the start of spring, on March the 21st. Like a lot of these old pagan festivals, it's got a weather rhyme attached to it. If Candlemas Day be fair and bright, winter will have another fight. If Candlemas Day brings cloud and rain, winter won't come back again. But as you can see, there's no cloud and rain today on Candlemas Day, and it's pretty fair and bright. So I guess that means we've got plenty of winter to look forward to. Those of us who live in the UK now know that Candlemas Day prediction was not far off, and winter did have another fight. We had 3 named storms during the middle of February. The second of these, Storm Eunice, did the most damage in southern England, including in the New Forest. Trees and power lines came down, closing some roads. A number of houses were without power for several days. In the forest, some of the pine trees came down, with one falling causing another to fall, like dominoes. Pine trees don't have deep roots. They have long fibrous roots that grow outwards. I'm surprised that more pine trees didn't come down in the strong winds. I don't know if the forestry will be able to reclaim any of this wood before it becomes too rotten. We'll see what happens over the coming months. Following these storms, we didn't need to be too concerned about the ground being too dry for the time of year. The ground was sodden and there was plenty of mud around. The main road between Lyndhurst and Bournemouth, the A35, has been closed for 3 months in order to replace an ageing bridge that the road runs over. One night in mid-February, the roads through Lyndhurst were closed, and a convoy of lorries made their way the wrong way up Lyndhurst High Street, carrying the huge 20-metre precast concrete beams that will form the deck of the replacement bridge. Quite a sight. Also during February, the government announced that most of the COVID restrictions would be lifted in England. Some people disagreed with this, but I think most people just wanted to get on with their lives and learn to live with COVID. As we reached the end of February, we had some lovely sunny days and signs that spring was not far away. The 1st of March is St David's Day. This year it's also Shrove Tuesday, more commonly known as Pancake Day. St David is the patron saint of Wales, and the Welsh national flower is the daffodil. Last year we saw these daffs out in flower for St David's Day. This year, despite having a mild winter, the daffodils are only just starting to flower. Not sure why they should be so much later this year. If you're walking your dogs in the forest, make sure that you keep them under control at all times. This is especially true at this time of year, if you're walking in an area where rare ground nesting birds are breeding. The breeding season starts in March. We had quite a bit of rain in early March this year. Then we had a dry period. Then more rain. This is a time of year for maintenance in the forest. This new fencing around an enclosure is a proper job, as they say in Cornwall. I heard a lot of this during March. This is called drumming, and the woodpeckers are staking their claim on a territory and advertising for a mate. Most birds, of course, sing to attract a mate. In mid-March, I saw one of these in the north of the forest, a white fallow deer. Whilst they aren't common, there are a few around throughout the forest, a beautiful sight. Some people think that these are albinos. They aren't albinos. White is a true colour of fallow deers. Young ones are often a pale fawn colour, and they get whiter with age. After staring at each other for a while, they decided they didn't like the look of me. On cue, spring arrived in the 3rd week of March. The early spring flowers appeared. The animals enjoyed the warmer days. I think these two black-headed gulls were deciding whether or not they were right for each other. The yellow brimstone butterfly is one of the first to be seen in the spring, fluttering around. One of the best known pubs in the forest, the Sir John Barleycorn, had a new thatched roof. What a great job it is! Can you see the thatched ducks on the roof? Well worth a visit next time you're in the area. It's just off of Junction 1 of the M27. The New Forest Camera Club held an exhibition in the Heritage Centre in Lyndhurst. Wish I could take photos like these. In April, the gorse flowers turn the heathlands into a sea of yellow. You'll often see birds sitting on top of the gorse bushes. One to look out for is the stonechat. Usually you'll see the male singing and advertising his territory at this time of year. You might also be very lucky and see a Dartford warbler. These photos were taken by Alan Forder in the north of the forest. The New Forest is one of the strongholds of the Dartford warblers, which only live in the southern counties of England. After the harsh winters of the 1960s, the Dartford warbler population was down to just a few pairs in England. Due to warmer winters since then, their numbers have recovered, but they're still not common in the forest. I've never been lucky enough to see one, despite my best efforts. During the second week of April, winter threatened to return. We had some night frosts and even a dusting of snow. These lambs must have wondered where the warmth had gone. Most of the fallow deer still enjoyed showing off their antlers. Some, though, began to shed their antlers. This light-headed buck was photographed by New Forest photographer Annette Gregory, who also found a newly shed deer antler. Easter was in mid-April this year, and for once on a bank holiday, the weather was sunny and warm throughout the long weekend. The leaves began to appear on the trees. The lack of rain since the beginning of April meant that the ground dried up. We had no April showers at all this year. Towards the end of April, the signs of spring were all around us. This male adder at the New Forest Reptile Centre sloughed its skin. The animals, like us humans, enjoyed the warmer days. I heard my first cuckoo of the year on April the 26th. And I saw my first foal of the year the following day. Spring has definitely sprung in the New Forest. Early May was dry and sunny, encouraging us all to get out and about and enjoy the warmer weather. It's not at all unusual for the traffic to be held up by ponies or donkeys on the roads in the New Forest. It's less common to be held up by a flock of sheep. May is the time of year when selected New Forest stallions are let out onto the forest for a few weeks to make friends with the lady ponies. This is very tightly controlled, and the best stallions are released in different parts of the forest, 20 in total this year. If you saw last year's diary, you might remember that we saw Bull Hill Major. He was selected to be released again this year, and his owner, Suzanne Kemp, let me know when he was being released at Minstead. And here he is, out on the forest for the first time since last July. He soon attracted a crowd of admirers, and after a short period of bucking and sniffing, they all disappeared on a lap of the cricket pitch. Everything quietened down fairly quickly, and Bull Hill Major settled in for the next 2 months, out on the forest. These are cuckoo flowers, otherwise known as lady's smock, and they get their name because they appear at the same time of year as we hear the cuckoo. The familiar sound of the cuckoo can be heard from late April and throughout May. It's the males that we hear as they advertise their territory and look for a mate. Cuckoos are famous, of course, for laying their eggs in other birds' nests, one in each nest. When the cuckoo's egg hatches out, the young chick heaves the other eggs out of the nest, leaving the poor foster mother to rear the young cuckoo, rather than her own chicks. This stock photo shows a reed warbler feeding a giant cuckoo chick. We think of cuckoos as a British bird, but in fact they're African birds. They spend most of the year living in sub-Saharan Africa. They come to Britain and Northern Europe to breed. Because they don't have to rear their own young, the adult cuckoos migrate back to Africa as soon as their eggs are laid. The BTO, the British Trust for Ornithology, run a cuckoo tracking study. They attach miniature satellite tags to a small number of cuckoos and monitor their movements. You can follow this on the BTO website. I've added a link to this in the text below. One of the new cuckoos added this year was tagged here in the New Forest. His name is Cooper, and I've added a link in the text so that you can follow Cooper's progress. The bluebells were later this year, I think, and they were at their best in May. Rhododendrons were in full bloom all over the forest, and the bracken grew so fast you could almost see it moving. The thorn bushes along the hedges were covered in white flowers. How do you know, though, whether you're looking at a blackthorn or a hawthorn? Well, the blackthorn has its flowers before its leaves. The hawthorn has its flowers after the leaves have appeared. And does it really matter? If you like making sloe gin, you'll find the sloes on the blackthorn bushes, but not on the hawthorn. So you'll know where to go in the autumn to collect your sloes before somebody else has them. In early June, we celebrated the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, 70 years since she became Queen of the United Kingdom. Events and tea parties were organised in almost every town and village, and the bunting manufacturers did very well. As part of the celebrations, over 3,000 beacons were lit throughout the UK and in Commonwealth countries around the world.
9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
40 of these beacons were in Hampshire, and this is one of the beacons being lit in the New Forest. During the summer, the red deer in the forest grow their new antlers. These lovely images from Annette Gregory show their development. During growth, the antlers are said to be in velvet. The fallow deer also grow their new antlers at this time. June is the rutting season for roe deer though, and their new antlers are already fully formed and they've lost their velvet covering. We had some heavy showers as June progressed, and then we had a heat wave for a few days. The new foals certainly improved with the warm weather. Scratch that itch. Wimbledon tennis started in the last week of June, and right on cue, the heavy showers returned. They didn't last long though, and it was a pleasant end to the month. The month started with sunshine and showers, typical English weather. When the sun came out, it was quite warm. One day in early July, I came upon these beauties. This is the New Forest Beagle Pack, out for some exercise. Beagles were originally bred to chase hares, using stamina not speed. Beagles could keep going for ages. Hunting hares has been banned in Britain since 2005, quite rightly in my opinion, and now the beagles follow a scent trail laid down by one of the huntsmen. And there they go, with the tails in the air. If you saw the previous video diary, you might remember that we saw Bull Hill Major, one of the stallions that was released onto the forest in May. Here he is with some of his mares, just before he was taken back off the forest in July. Oh, one of the mares needs rounding up. He soon had her back with the rest of the group, and all was calm again. The rutting season for the roe deer has ended now, and the testosterone of the bucks has subsided. I saw this buck feeding early one morning. He saw me, but it didn't seem to bother him too much. Then he decided that he'd had enough of me and pranced off to find some peace and quiet. Well, after a showery start to July, the days got warmer and hotter and hotter. In mid-July we had a heat wave with record temperatures in southern England. There were several fires in the forest, some of which were started by barbecues, even though they're banned in the New Forest. The ground quickly began to dry out and the grass died off. These young donkeys decided that the heat was just too much. And these ponies stayed in the shade during the heat of the day. The New Forest show has been cancelled for the past 2 years due to COVID, so it made a welcome return this year. It's a 3-day show, and if you're in the area it's well worth visiting. We were away that week, so we weren't able to attend the show this year. It was very successful by all account, with great weather and a high turnout of visitors, competitors and exhibitors. The hot weather continued into August and the purple heather started to flower. Some beekeepers set up their hives among the flowering heather to allow the bees to gather the heather pollen and produce the famous New Forest heather honey. Yummy yum. As the bird nesting season came to an end, the tree felling recommenced in the forest. Pine trees are grown as a crop. The wood's mainly used in the construction industry and for fencing posts, with offcuts and other lower grade and recycled wood used to make cardboard boxes and firewood. If you saw the last video diary, you might remember that one of the cuckoos in the New Forest was tagged by the BTO, the British Trust for Ornithology, so that its migration to Africa could be tracked. The New Forest cuckoo is called Cooper. Cuckoos actually spend most of the year in Africa, and Cooper left the New Forest in June. By the 7th of July, the tag showed that he was crossing the Sahara Desert. A few days later he was in Nigeria, where he'll spend the winter. We'll follow Cooper and see when he migrates back to the New Forest next year. The foals that were born in May are growing well now. This is a foal that I see frequently on my walks, and what a cracker he is. The hot weather continued in August with no sign of rain. On August the 5th, a hosepipe ban came into force in some parts of the forest, and a drought was declared on the 12th of August. The forest became drier still, illustrated by this image of Bolton's bench at Lyndhurst, looking very dry indeed. It was the driest 6 months for 200 years, and the driest July since 1836. This image, taken at one of the local golf courses, shows the difference between the fairway, which has had no rain, and the green, which has been watered. The bracken began to dry out and started to turn brown much earlier than normal. In the middle of August, something strange happened. We had rain, and it rained for 2 days. It wasn't enough to make a huge difference, although the forest did start to look slightly greener. The streamometer still shows no water at all in the stream at the end of August, and the water levels in the local ponds were well down on their usual levels too. I wondered how the vines were faring in the drought, so I went back to see Ian and Amanda at Brookhill Vineyard. The encouraging answer is that the vines and the grapes are doing very well. Vines have deep tap roots, and so they can still find water deep down in the clay soil. The grapes are slightly smaller than usual, but Ian's hopeful that this will lead to an increase in quality. The grapes are just beginning to ripen, and so attracting the attention of the birds. On the day I visited, Ian was preparing to put up the nets around the bunches of grapes to keep the birds off. Towards the end of August, the forest fruits began to ripen. These blackberries have definitely been affected by the lack of water. They look very small compared to normal. The lack of water also led to some of the trees in the forest shedding some of their leaves. It was as if autumn had come early. The first few days of September were warm and dry. Then we had several days of rain, including thunderstorms. I was out walking with Edith, the miniature schnauzer, one morning, and we were caught in one of the thunderstorms and sheltered under a tree. After a couple of minutes, these 2 young roe deer appeared. They could see us, but they didn't seem to be wary of us. They stayed around for several minutes before they decided it was time to move on. On September the 8th, the Queen died, and the country entered into 2 weeks of mourning. The funeral was a huge state occasion, watched by billions of people around the world. For many people in the New Forest and elsewhere, one of the most poignant scenes was the sight of Emma, the Queen's pony, as she stood at the side of the long walk to Windsor Castle to watch Her Majesty's coffin drive past. After the rain, the days were drier but colder. Autumn was in the air. The gorse spider mites were busy weaving their webs. If you want to see these at their best, go out early in the morning when any mist or dew clings to the webs and really makes them stand out. If you remember back to August, the ground was very dry. What a difference the rain makes 1 month later. Autumn is the time of year when the acorns fall from the oak trees. After the summer drought, I thought we might have fewer acorns this year. In fact, we've had a bumper crop, although some of the acorns might be a bit smaller than usual. That hasn't stopped the animals from greedily eating them up, and as we know, eating too many acorns can make the ponies and donkeys seriously ill. The cows are quite keen on acorns too. They don't make the pigs ill though, and so the pigs are let out onto the forest to eat many of the acorns to prevent the other animals from eating too many. This is called the pannage, and is a New Forest tradition that goes back all the way to the time of William the Conqueror, almost 1,000 years. After a hard day guzzling acorns, it's time for a nap. One day at the end of September, I was surprised to see Cadnam cricket pitch covered in New Forest ponies. The fence was still up, but I noticed the gate was open. I presume it's the end of the cricket season. I hope it is, otherwise there's an awful lot of pony poo to pick up on the outfield. Back at Brook Hill Vineyard, the grape picking season is underway. These are Pinot Noir grapes, ready to be picked. On the day I visited, there was a good turnout of pickers, all raring to go. There's been a bumper harvest this year. Some of the grapes are slightly smaller than usual, due to the drought, but there's more bunches, so lots of work to do. Even I got roped in to help. Many hands make light work, and the buckets rapidly filled up. Ian emptied the bunches of grapes into the crusher, stems and all. The grape juice extracted from these Pinot Noir grapes will become Brook Hill Sparkling Rosé. In early October, a scarecrow trail appeared in Lyndhurst. There were 85 scarecrows in all, and adults and children alike all enjoyed following the trail around the village. £1,800 was raised for St Michael and All Angels PTA and Lyndhurst Preschool Charities, a great effort by everyone involved. This is the rutting season for the red deer and the fallow deer. If you've ever wondered what a dominant fallow deer buck sounds like when he's with his harem, well, he sounds like this. The younger or weaker bucks that don't have any does tend to hang around together near the main gathering, hoping to lure one of the does away from the dominant bucks. This young male is about 18 months old and has grown his first set of antlers. He's known as a pricket, and he'll have to wait a few years before he's strong enough to compete with the dominant bucks. This is also the time of year that the fungi grow in the forest, and this year seems to have been a particularly good year for fungi enthusiasts. A huge range of fungi grow in the New Forest, some quite rare. Whilst some of these are edible, please don't pick them. Leave them in the forest where they belong. One of the rarer species that I was fortunate enough to see this year is called devil's fingers. These first appear as golf ball size eggs. When the conditions are favourable, the red tentacles emerge and form a star shape. The tentacles are covered in an evil-smelling slime which attracts insects. The slime contains spores and it sticks to the insects, who then disperse the spores in the area. Some of these spores will develop into new devil's fingers fungi next year. The last few days of October were showery but very mild. The bracken turned autumnal brown and the leaves on the trees began to change colour. And the shops started putting up their Christmas displays. November blew in with Storm Claudio, bringing wind and heavy rain sweeping across the country. The New Forest looked pretty wet in places. At least the hosepipe ban finally ended. The rutting season for the fallow deer was still going on, and spare bucks were looking for any lingering does. This buck suddenly appeared in the track in front of me one morning. I wasn't quite sure which way he was going to run. I don't think he was either. After a short time, he was off on his way, disappearing into the bracken. The New Forest Walking and Cycling Festival ended early in November. Another very successful year, with most of the organised walks and rides sold out. From the 7th of November, all captive birds were required to be kept indoors due to the avian flu outbreak. This has already killed hundreds of thousands of wild birds, including birds here in the New Forest, and is a very serious outbreak. Remembrance Day had an increased poignancy this year, with the war in Ukraine showing no sign of ending. Down at Leap Country Park, a beautiful wave of poppies was installed to coincide with the poppy appeal. 2,140 hand-knitted poppies were donated by the local community, and almost £500 was raised for the British Legion charity. Processions were held in towns and villages throughout the forest area, as we remember those who've fallen in wars, and those who are still in danger today. Mid-November brought more rain, but it remained very mild. The rain eventually stopped and the sun started to shine through the clouds, and we had some of these. The mild weather prolonged the fungi season, and new fungi could be seen if you looked hard enough. If you've driven through Cadnam recently, you might have noticed that you can now see Split-Wind Pond again. The bushes around the pond had become quite overgrown, and the Greening Copythorn group of volunteers spent 2 mornings cutting it back and clearing out some of the invasive plants in the pond. The group did a great job. I'll go back there in the spring to see if I can see any of the newts that live there. As we progressed through November, the autumn colours began to arrive on the trees in the forest. This was quite late again this year due to the mild weather. If you drove along the road from Lyndhurst to Bewley earlier in the year, you'd have passed these conifers at Matley Ridge. If you drive along there now, it looks more like this. This is part of Forestry England's heathland restoration work. The pine trees, which were planted in the 1970s, have been felled, and the wood will be used mainly in the building industry. All of the tree stumps are being removed now and burnt, and this area is being restored to open heathland, how it was before the trees were planted. These heathland areas in the forest are incredibly important for all kinds of species, many of which are very rare, and the New Forest as a whole is recognised as an internationally important site for nature conservation. The weather in December got noticeably colder and hastened the leaves falling from the trees. I was surprised to find this fresh fungi in December. I thought it would be too cold by now. I believe this is Coprinus comatus, commonly known as a shaggy inkcap. There's not much to eat now in the forest, particularly when the ground is frosty. The ponies rely more on eating leaves from the bushes and trees. These donkeys were eating the brambles on the side of the road. In mid-December we had a blast from the Arctic for about 10 days, with frost every night and dry sunny days. We even had a dusting of snow. During this cold weather we had a very rare visitor. Thor the walrus turned up on Calshot Beach. Walruses mainly live in and around the Arctic Circle, and it's rare for them to come this far south. Thor has been travelling around the coast of Europe. He was last spotted in the Netherlands on November the 6th, and has been travelling along the coast of France as far as Brittany in the last few weeks. After an overnight rest stop at Calshot, Thor went on his way the following day. 5 days later, he was spotted on the beach at Dieppe in northern France. My thanks to Nigel Jones, who kindly allowed me to use this image of Thor. The cold weather ended abruptly. One night the temperature was -5 degrees. The next night it was +11 degrees. With the warmer weather came the rain, and lots of it. This is the Lymington River at Brockenhurst, how it usually looks. This is how it looked after 2 days of rain. I don't think there's any danger of anyone camping in this field at the moment. The streamometer shows us how quickly the stream filled up. It's always nice to see the Christmas lights on houses at Christmas time. Not sure there were quite as many this year though, presumably because of the high cost of electricity. I went back to Byron Road to see if they had their lights on this year, and yes they did. Every year Byron Road is famous for its Christmas lights. There's about 80,000 lights in the display, and they raise money for the NHS. Since they've been doing this, they've raised over £85,000. A brilliant effort. And that brings us to the end, at this look back at 2022. I hope you found the video diary interesting. If you did, please subscribe to our channel to see more videos about living in the New Forest. Thanks for watching.